Order. Rob Roberts to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr Hosey, and an honour to serve under your chairmanship. There is an old saying that you shouldn't talk about politics or religion, and I sometimes have to wonder whether this extends to the topic of pensions as well, where saving for a house or car is seen as exciting and a real achievement, and rightly so. The same enthusiasm and planning is never given when people are saving for their retirement. It's time these attitudes around pensions and planning for retirement changed. Pensions are becoming more and more important, and we need to talk about them both here in Parliament and in the wider public domain if we want people to feel empowered to make their own decisions about their future and secure a retirement that they deserve. People are living longer, state pension age has increased, but discussions and debates around pension policy and infrastructure hasn't really moved on in any significant way. And a recent study found that 22 million working-age adults don't feel that they understand enough about pensions to make decisions about saving for retirement, highlighting that we need to do more to ensure people feel informed and empowered to do that saving. The fact that 5 million people in retirement aren't satisfied with their financial circumstances proves that more needs to be done earlier to ensure everyone is taking steps now so that their later years are more secure and more comfortable. And that only 38% of 7 to 17-year-olds say that they learned how to manage money at school showcases that the lack of knowledge and awareness about savings and pensions starts right at the beginning. So simply, Mr Hosey, this tells us that we need to be having frank and honest conversations about pensions much earlier in people's lives. It's not enough to start discussing savings and retirement at 60. It needs to be happening in education, in the workplace, at key moments in life, and also here in Parliament to frame that debate. And today's debate, I hope, is the first of many important and crucial conversations around pensions and how we as parliamentarians can look to shape pension policy in a positive way in the years to come. In this debate, I'm going to touch on a couple of broad themes, the majority of which the Minister can respond to, appreciating that some of the topics may be for the Treasury to consider rather than my honourable friend, but are relevant all the same. Although it's hugely important to start these conversations surrounding pensions and retirement as early in life as possible, it wouldn't be right to hold a debate on pensions policy without first looking at how we can help pensioners now who may already be struggling. And sadly, pensioner poverty is a real problem across the UK. While it may have decreased over the last 20 years, and I do commend the efforts of the Minister and the Department for their work on this, data from Age UK has found that there are still 1.9 million pensioners living in poverty in the UK. This is over a quarter of pensioners who, despite having worked all their lives, paid their taxes and contributed to our economy, are now living their later years facing some more challenging decisions than they necessarily should, wondering if they can afford to turn their heating on, pay their bills, and watching how every penny is spent. But it doesn't have to be this way. For many pensioners, they'll be eligible for pension credit, a financial lifeline which tops up their income, preventing them from having to make those difficult decisions like keeping warm in their home or having a good meal. Pension credit is also a gateway to other benefits which make a real difference to pensioners' quality of life, including cold weather payments, NHS dental treatment, and topically these days, a free TV licence for the over 75s. Quite simply, pension credit gives older people the financial stability and security to live their lives in a much more worry-free manner. It's also important to note that while pension credit makes a huge difference to many individual pensioners' lives and well-being, it also has benefits for the whole of society. And research from Independent Age estimates that the cost to the government of those eligible for pension credit but not taking it is around £4 billion a year in increased NHS and social care spending. So it's imperative that we either get the implementation of this benefit right or just reform it altogether. The question is this a benefit that works effectively for the people it's supposed to serve? Currently, it's not working nearly as effectively as it could be, with uptake stagnating at around 60% for the last 10 years, and it's never been more than 70%. Put that into perspective, that's around 4 in every 10 eligible pensioners not collecting the free money that's due to them, which means that at present, around £3.5 billion that's allocated to eradicating pensioner poverty isn't reaching older people each year. This is in part due to awareness of pension credit being very low, despite many advertising campaigns by successive governments, seem to need a wholesale reform to help reach the people it's designed to help. Now, the low take-up pension credit is also in part due to the way it's assessed. Instead of being an automatic benefit which is provided to those who need it, pensioners have to make a claim when they reach the appropriate age, which considers their income level and their savings. This is problematic for a couple of reasons, not the least of which is that the process itself can be seen as daunting, overly complicated, and difficult to navigate for pensioners. But also because by taking into account people's savings pots, it discourages long-term responsible economic actions like saving, because they'll become ineligible not only for pension credit, but for other gateway benefits that I mentioned earlier on. I believe then that we need to have a fundamental change in how pension credit is assessed and claimed. We should be looking to help those who need it most by ensuring that financial support is accessible and fair, taking away the blame on people who fail to make that claim. One way to do that would be by making pension credit a full or partial auto-payment benefit. So no claim has to be submitted, and basing it solely on income levels, which HMRC really should be able to track, to ensure that no one is unfairly at a disadvantage for having prudently saved throughout their working life. And while successive governments have taken steps to raise the profile and take-up of pension credit, as seen through the work to make it claimable online during the pandemic, I do think that we need serious fundamental change if we want pension credit to play its part in eradicating pensioner poverty and helping the poorest households. I'd like the government to consider its role in boosting take-up by making it an automatic benefit which solely considers income. Now, whilst pension credit is one important issue that I believe the government should be reviewing as we look to bring positive change, there are many other areas which I believe would also benefit from innovation and further development, and one such area would be the auto-enrolment regime. Auto-enrolment introduced by the government to improve pension savings in the UK, and it's worked. It has. It's reversed the decline of workplace pension saving. Prior to the start of auto-enrolment, the number of eligible employees who were enrolled was 10.7 million. This is now increased to almost 19 million, almost 90% of those eligible. And whilst that confirms the success of its original aims, instead of engaging the wider public in taking an active role in their workplace pensions, being auto-enrolled has meant that the vast majority of savers assume that they'll automatically have a large pension pot when they retire. But this is often not the case, and we've added a layer of what I'll call complacency risk into the mix of other issues to consider. This is the risk that people will assume that the pot that they're building up is going to get them a particular lifestyle in retirement, which may not always match the reality of what will happen. Now look, don't get me wrong, AE has been fantastic in getting pensions moving again. I really believe that we should be looking at what's been done so far as a starting point rather than an end game. Of course.
First of all, I congratulate him on securing the debate, and I accept entirely that this is a legitimate discussion about the future progress of automatic enrolment, which has transformed savings amongst women, amongst young people, in a way that they've gone from pretty much 40% saving up to 80% saving. And I agree that he is right that we are doing better than we have previously done, but it is the suggestions for the future that clearly need to take us forward, and I support entirely the direction of travel that he's taking us on.
Thank the Minister for his intervention, and the suggestions to the future are about to be unfolding before his very eyes, as he may have anticipated. Look, analysis done by the Pensions and Lifetime Savings Association suggests that the current contribution rate of 8% is simply not enough for people to have a good standard of living in retirement. I fear this is going to be the case for many people in several years' time who've been auto-enrolled into workplace pensions and assume that due to this rate being automatically set by the government, this means that they will have a comfortable pension pot when they retire. But unfortunately, many people are simply not engaged enough with their pensions to realise this until it's too late, despite them being fundamental to their future, and I fear that auto-enrolment has created that complacency that I mentioned earlier. So in order to combat this issue, the PLSA has proposed an increase in the minimum contribution level to at least 12%, and I would agree with their proposal. 43% of savers don't know how much of their monthly salary they should be saving in any case, and the increase would benefit a great many individuals by increasing their savings further. Additional changes could include reducing the starting age to 18 and removing the lower earnings limit so that every penny of earned income counts towards pensionable pay, which according to the ABI has the potential to save a further £2.5 billion in pension pots. This would not only increase the number of years that the individuals save for and consequently increase their pot, but would also emphasise the importance of saving from a younger age. But what else can we do with auto-enrolment? Why not have a little bit more kind of outside-the-box thinking with it and really create a savings culture in the UK? If COVID has taught us anything, it's taught us the importance of preparedness and planning for every eventuality. One of the bedrocks of financial planning is having in place an emergency fund, but putting money away each month is perhaps easier said than done. There's always something else to spend it on. Perhaps as part of auto-enrolment, we could look at including a savings element to it as well. Why not, when payroll is making a deduction for the relevant amount for a pension, why not put 1% into a savings pot at the same time? Auto-enrolment ISA, perhaps. And give people the ability to increase those percentages if they want to whatever they can personally afford. Perhaps creating a savings culture on the back of pensions policy could be one of the more pleasant side effects of COVID, as many people may be more open to having emergency funds to combat any challenges that may come up in the future. Moving on from AE, another area of pension policy I believe could benefit from further positive change are the issues relating to the annual and lifetime allowances. Now, bearing in mind this is a Treasury issue and not necessarily for the DWP, I'll not labour the point, but arguably there's no need to have an annual allowance if you have a lifetime allowance. As saving should be encouraged and individuals shouldn't be penalised for taking on extra work and saving more into their pensions, as doctors were recently, leading to them not taking on shifts and procedures because of the dangers of having a significant tax bill. A potential solution to that issue would be to remove the tax penalty for breaching the annual allowance, but keep the restriction on the amount of tax relief available to the current limits. That means there'd be no additional cost to the exchequer, and people will be able to continue saving into their pensions in the same way, yet those who are unnecessarily penalised under the limits of the annual allowance wouldn't be at a disadvantage. As I say, it's a Treasury area which I'm sure my honourable friend will take great pleasure in passing along to them. Ultimately, wider change is needed within the pensions industry, and one way to achieve this and to encourage people to engage early with pensions is by improving the accessibility and reach of financial advice and guidance. Despite having been a financial planner involved in the pensions industry for many years prior to coming to this place, I can admit the topic of pensions can be complex, and for many without this experience and knowledge, I can see how pensions can be viewed as hard to understand or even, God forbid, a boring subject. What a terrible thought. I welcome the government's push for a simpler statements regime which is coming down the line to make statements more comprehensible both for the consumer and for professionals. Members would not believe the wide range of disparate information that pension providers send out to customers, making it impossible not only to understand what you've got, but also impossible to do accurate comparisons between providers. It's currently extremely complicated, and I look forward to simpler statements which will put the consumer in charge. I just hope and keep my fingers crossed that this policy isn't several years in the making, as the wheels of government do tend to take rather an age to turn. But while it's right that we should be empowering individuals to make their own decisions about their futures, we should ensure that before such life-changing decisions are made, individuals feel informed, supported, and have considered their own unique circumstances. And so advice and guidance around pensions needs to be accessible, affordable and available. And despite the benefits financial advice can bring, only 8% of all UK adults have received it. And while that is amazingly an increase from previous years, it's still a shockingly low number and is putting individuals' retirements at risk. Now, whether this is because people feel financial advice is unaffordable or only for the very wealthy, or simply because people feel it's a risk and don't trust the financial services industry, we need to be actively working to change these perceptions and show that financial advice is for everyone. I can assure the public that for the vast majority of advisors I've worked with in the past, they'll treat someone's £30,000 pension with the same care and diligence they'll treat someone's £300,000 pot, because each sum is just as important to the individual. Indeed, the smaller pot can be considered much more important to that individual in many ways, because it will often be the only pension provision that a lower-earning individual has, and so the risks of it running out too early are much more significant. If we don't promote the need and benefits of financial advice, I worry that in 20, 30, 40 years down the line, we're going to have a retirement crisis on our hands. Recent data shows that 35% of the adult population say they don't have a pension. Out of those that do, 36% aren't sure how much is in their pot. But even more worryingly, the uncertainty around pensions goes further than individual circumstances, with almost half of the population admitting they wouldn't have a clue how much income they'll need in order to retire comfortably anyway. Clearly shows that widespread advice and education regarding pensions and retirement is urgently needed if we want the people to be able to live out their later years in financial security and comfort. Now, in the past, these type of financial decisions and risks were shouldered by employers, pension providers and life companies. But now, with the advent of and the introduction of greater flexibility and freedoms to the pensions marketplace, it's increasingly down to the individual, which is a wonderful thing in some respects, but also very worrying in others. Because for such important decisions, we shouldn't really be placing all of the responsibility onto the people. Instead, we should be ensuring that people feel supported and know where to turn for help and advice. And financial advice isn't only needed to help people feel more informed and aware when making decisions which will affect their lives, it also adds real value to people's pensions, providing them with a better retirement in the long run. A recent report by the International Longevity Centre has found that those that have sought professional financial advice are better off by an average of £40,000 in their pension pot compared to those who did not seek advice, which is not an insignificant amount. So, ensuring that financial advice is seen as a viable option for people is not only the right thing to do, but it's crucial if we want people to have the best possible future, as well as the peace of mind that they're making the right decisions to benefit them. But most importantly, how can we make sure that people are accessing the right financial advice and support? Forcing people to access support, well, that's not an option. Some people won't even take a vaccine to save lives, for goodness sake. So mandating things just because people have an inbuilt aversion to being dictated to, mandating things just doesn't work. But one option, however, is to encourage individuals to use guidance services just like PensionWise, the free and impartial guidance service that was set up in 2015. Accessing guidance is often a first step towards accessing full financial advice and should be greatly encouraged. Seeking guidance helps people gain a good initial understanding about their options and helps boost people's confidence in their ability to do things like avoiding pension scams, which sadly we know is an all too common problem. In addition, we know that financial guidance is a great enabler for the full advice process. Data from PensionWise's user evaluation report recently has found that 36% of appointment customers with PensionWise went on to speak to a financial advisor in the following 3 months, compared to only 22% of non-users. That highlights that we need to emphasise the benefits of these services and ensure that people use them as early as possible to improve advice take-up and improve the financial outlook for many individuals in the UK. Currently, it's far too easy to opt out of taking this free guidance from PensionWise. And many studies over many years have shown that individuals need several exposures to information before they'll start taking action. So perhaps we need to start them on that journey a little bit earlier, so that they're engaged in the process when the time is right. Of course.
I'm extremely grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for giving me and for leaving me intervene on him. And can I commend him on his speech? It shows some great expertise in this very important policy field. And I think he's right to press on this issue in terms of financial advice. Does he agree with me, though, that there should really be a greater role within the education systems of the respective countries of the UK, so that our school children leaving school are financially capable, and when it comes to pensions in particular, the earlier people start saving for their pension, the better. So their interventions need to be happening far earlier than they do.
Absolutely, a very salient and very, very welcome intervention from the honourable gentleman. I completely agree. We need to start financial education in schools around the more basic things. What's a current account? How do they work? What's an overdraft? What's a credit card? Because the amount of people who are leaving school and university already in massive amounts of debt before even taking into account university fees and things is staggering. And if we're not getting people on the right footing, I completely agree with the honourable gentleman. It's definitely something that we should be looking into developing completely. Now, look at that now, I've lost my place, although I appreciated the gap to take a drink. But, as I say, people need to take this journey earlier. And during my research for this speech, I came across an article from a few years ago with a picture of a very young-looking, fresh-faced pensions minister supporting... No, it was you, honestly. Supporting one provider's midlife MOT concept. Engaging with the UK population as a matter of course when they hit particular ages could be a transformative idea. Imagine the benefits to speaking to someone aged 45 when they may be in a more stable home and employment situation after those expensive years of having young children, and providing some guidance to them as to things that they should be looking at from a financial point of view. That could have a significant impact on their outlook towards pensions and financial planning for the still 20 plus years that they have to go until retirement.
Will you give way on that?
Of course.
So I'm conscious that this job has aged me a great deal, and that I'm a great deal different to the fresh-faced photograph that was taken in 2017 when I first got this job. I have no idea in what way, aside from the lockdown stone, why it is I've aged so much in this job. But in terms of the midlife MOT, which he refers to, can I point him to the Aviva trial and the various trials done by private sector, where they started out as an HR benefit to employees, but they actually found that the benefit of the midlife MOT into the particularly employees was good, but the benefit to the business and also to the wider state in terms of wealth, work and well-being, the three things it's measured on, was utterly transformational. And I would certainly encourage all businesses to follow the initiative of those companies, and all public sector to follow the initiative of DWP, who've pioneered the midlife MOT as well.
Absolutely, and I thank the Minister for his intervention. It was indeed the Aviva article in which I saw the fresh-faced youthfulness, who has now turned into an advert for Just for Men. It's working very well for the Minister. It's beginning. But he's absolutely right. Look, adding a health review to that midlife MOT process could also have untold benefits to catching illnesses early, encouraging people to change their lifestyles before problems occur. And I completely endorse the Minister's support of the midlife MOT process and encourage him to work across departments to put something together in that space that could drive real change, both in terms of financial and medical well-being. But just like the banking and financial industry has developed and adapted to the 21st century, the financial advice sector also needs to undergo wholesale reform and change. Financial advice is often viewed as too expensive, or individuals worry that they don't have enough to invest. These outdated perceptions of the sector need to change, and to do so, the sector needs to become more transparent and needs to move towards set fees on an hourly rate or a project fee basis, helping make accessing financial advice more affordable and easier. As there's a large amount of worry and mistrust around the financial services industry, making the advice sector more transparent would certainly help boost confidence and trust in consumers that they're getting the right advice. The inherent unfairness of percentage-based charging is clear. Charging double the fee to do a £200,000 investment over a £100,000 investment is simply wrong. It literally takes no more time and no more resource to do that work. Even factoring in slightly more indemnity risk to the advisor for advising on a higher sum, it certainly wouldn't justify anything like doubling the fee. And I firmly believe that the public should seek out advisors who charge fees expressed in pounds and pence and give a quotation for services which is based on time expected or a fixed project fee rather than percentage-based.
Would my honourable friend give way?
Certainly.
Would you agree with me then that many of these providers that give pensions advice should actually be putting their fees and charges very explicitly on websites and other promotional materials so that people can see from the start of the start of the process, what those costs would be.
I very much do agree with my honourable friend, and it is incumbent on advisors now, when they're seeing clients for the first time, to give them what we call an initial disclosure document, which sets out the fees and charges that a client can rightly expect to pay. And the expression of the fees should always be completely upfront and agreed to by the client before any work is undertaken. So absolutely a vital part of the process for sure. But too many consumers are missing out on the potential opportunities that advice can bring because of this lack of understanding, or this perception that advice is too expensive. So it's time that we look to develop the financial advice sector and make it work for consumers. I urge the Minister, therefore, to continue to develop awareness of financial advice and guidance service and make it as accessible as possible, so that the advice gap around pensions can be closed. One area of pensions where the advice gap is intrinsically linked is costs and charges associated with pensions. In many cases, the associated costs and charges, whether that be the annual management charge or underlying fund charges, are too much of a focus for consumers and advisors and the regulator and policy, to the detriment of the performance and quality of the actual pension. Instead of focusing on which contract is the cheapest, more time and guidance needs to be shared considering the end result and the outcome. This is what will be available to pensioners, and this is what will impact the quality of their retirement. Even though pension costs may be more expensive, if a contract has the propensity to generate higher returns, then it will give a better end result for the individual. In addition, as many people don't seek financial advice regarding their pensions, as mentioned earlier, many will lack the knowledge to understand the full impact of any costs and charges, often leading to people to just choose the cheapest contract, which may well not benefit their situation. But the principle of having lower charges and less of a drag on performance is a noble principle, but it doesn't always work out that principles follow through to superior outcomes. It's the outcomes that people can spend in retirement, not the principle. And as a final topic, Mr. Hosey, this would not be right to hold a debate which looks to improve people's future in retirement if we don't consider how to ensure that the pension industry is becoming green and playing its part in protecting the environment. With pension funds globally holding around $20 trillion in assets and being long-term investments, they are an integral part of socially responsible investing and can play a major part in helping the UK to reach net zero. And I'll commend, in his absence, my honourable friend, the member for Grantham, in his campaign that has led to the UK coming out with its first green investment bond, which is on the horizon. According to the Make My Money Matter campaign, sustainable pensions are 27 times more impactful in reducing your carbon footprint than stopping air travel and following a plant-based diet combined. 27 times. Looking across the whole fund universe, relatively few pension funds have fully embraced socially responsible investing or incorporated environmental, social and governance factors into their processes. And whilst some people have suggested that the government should force private pension schemes to invest in a socially responsible way, that feels like an overreach and an inappropriate use of power, and counterproductive, as it may well encourage disinvestment. The bottom line to keep in mind is that pensions are there to provide retirement income first and foremost, and if we can save the planet afterwards, then that's an extra bonus. But 68% of UK savers want their investments to consider people and planet alongside profits, while 71% would opt for a fully or partially sustainable pension if they had the choice, showing the demand for socially responsible investment of pensions. Now, the Pension Schemes Bill has recently created a task force on climate-related financial disclosures that puts the consumer in charge and increases the transparency of pension funds regarding investments. It's clearly a demand in the UK for socially responsible investing within pension funds. The government aims to facilitate that, as shown with this task force, and I do commend them for it and look forward to seeing how it develops. So to conclude, Mr. Hosey, as I mentioned at the beginning, pension policy is a topic which can often be overlooked. It's overly complex, it's too technical, and it's not relevant to the many immediate pressing issues of the day. But it doesn't have to be overlooked. Pensions policy is a topic which is incredibly important and will impact all of us in later life as we look to retire. And it's the responsibility of all of us to look at how we can shape it positively to provide the best retirement for as many people as possible. The contributions and sacrifices that our older citizens have made throughout this pandemic and indeed throughout their lives are considerable. And it's only right that our policies recognise and reflect that hard work, allowing them to live out their retirement in comfort with the peace of mind that their pension will see them through. I welcome the contributions from colleagues, as well as from the Minister and the Shadow Minister. Whilst great strides have been achieved through the Pension Schemes Bill, there's always more to do if we want our pensioners to have the retirement they so rightly deserve.
Is that this House has considered the future of pensions policy. Before I call the next speaker, if we take no more than 7 minutes per backbencher, it'll all go swimmingly. Sarah Owen.
Thank you, Mr Hosey, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. And may I congratulate the member from Devon for securing this incredibly important debate. We've rightly spoken to a lot over the last few months about how deeply people have been affected throughout this pandemic. People who've lost jobs, businesses that are worried that they're going under, and the 3 million people who haven't been able to access COVID support. But I'm here today to speak up for my pension age constituents who are struggling too. Since 2010, as we've already heard, at least an extra 400,000 pensioners have been pushed into poverty, and a generation of women born in the 1950s were betrayed, leaving millions of women with no time to make alternative plans, with sometimes devastating personal consequences, including people I've spoken to in Luton North. The people who have written to me have done the right thing in life. They paid into the system, they worked hard, and now they want their government to be there when they need it. People like my mum and her generation of friends, the WASPy women. Here's what one Luton North constituent said to me when she wrote, "I am 65 years old and I am due to receive my state pension next year at the age of 66. I am currently struggling financially. I was due to receive my pension at the age of 60. I've worked my whole life, and then I stopped as I became a carer for my elderly mother. I'm not entitled to apply for any benefits, and with the current COVID pandemic, it's even more difficult for me to consider working. I suffer from a lot of health problems. I was diagnosed with TB last year, and since have been receiving treatment for it. I have never struggled so much financially before as I am now. The pandemic has made it even worse for me." I wish I could say that that was a one-off, Minister, but I'm afraid my inbox has been full of similar letters. Of course.
I'm extremely grateful to the Honourable Lady for giving me and for raising this very important issue. I've also received numerous correspondence over the years in relation to this group of women, and I think the anger about the injustice relates to the goalposts being changed late in their lives. You know, what in her view is the way forward to help address the problems faced by these women? Some are campaigning for bridging pensions or early access to their state pension. Is that her view? Maybe that's the way forward, or is there an alternative strategy that she would support?
I thank the Honourable Member for their intervention, and this is something that I'm going to come to later on in the speech, because whatever the future of our pensions policy, this injustice must be addressed. The pandemic has had a devastating impact on older people in this country in terms of isolation, impacts on mental and physical health, as well as finances. So may I put on record my thanks to wonderful organisations like Age Concern in Luton, who have been there every step of the way for older people in my constituency. However, it shouldn't be this way. The government shouldn't be turning its back on pensioners, and I was truly appalled by the decision this year to scrap the free TV licences for over 75s, adding yet another financial burden and barrier to accessing important information, especially at this time. So I asked the Minister what the government is going to do during the pandemic to help those pensioners who, like so many others, have found themselves struggling to make ends meet. And as we enter one of the worst recessions since records began, what guarantees will the Minister give to protect pensions in the future? And with the recent findings from the Pension Policy Institute, which showed that single mothers, carers, disabled people, black, Asian and minority ethnic groups have the pension wealth of just 15% of the national average, with 81% of carers and 21% of disabled people currently shut out of being automatically enrolled into a workplace pension. What is the Minister doing to tackle this huge savings gap? Because it is scandalous. It's clear that even before the pandemic, many people already felt a deep sense of unfairness about our pension system. This Parliament has debated this issue time and time again and filled the chamber again and again because of the strength of feeling amongst the 1950s women we represent who have been ripped off by this government. As a new member, this is my first opportunity, really, to raise the countless emails that I know that we have all received on this issue and the massive number of conversations that we've all had and that I had personally on the doorsteps at the election. In fact, one gentleman came out of a mosque and he said, I wasn't sure how I was going to vote, but I'm definitely voting for Labour now because my wife has told me that you have promised that we will see justice for the WASPy women. And I would like to give that hope to every family because this isn't just about women, it is also about the families that are supported by those women. And any future reforms of pensions policy must come with justice for the 1950 women who has lost out when the government changed the pension age. Again, this is all about fairness. Those women worked, they paid in, they did the right thing, and had parts of their pensions taken away. I asked the Minister if the government's line from last year still stands. Is there no money for the WASPy women, or will this change? Dignity as we grow older shouldn't be an optional extra. It should be the very basic that a government should provide. In one of the richest countries in the world, we shouldn't have any older people living in poverty.
Thank you, Mr Hosey. It's a pleasure to speak under your chairmanship, and I'd like to thank my honourable friend, the member for Delyn, for securing this, I believe, important debate, and it's a pleasure to follow the honourable lady. I think that I'd start by saying that I think that it is an important debate and it should be talked about more, and more of us should be talking about it. And I think when my honourable friend mentioned the amount of people do actually talk about pensions, we could have done with seeing a few more people in here today representing their constituents and the future pensions policy of this country, because I think it is incredibly important. And I'm sure my honourable friend will thank all members for participating, but I think it really is testament to those that really do care about this issue that they're here today. Obviously, it affects the lives of millions of people in our country, and as has been said, it's very complex and complicated for people to navigate through. My Southport constituency has an incredibly high level of pensioners. It's a place where not only we've got a high level of pensioners of our own, but we actually get people to come and retire to my beautiful seaside resort. And so pensions is quite often something I talk about with people. And whilst I will talk about a few issues on pensions policy, because I think there are a number of things that have already been said, but I want to reiterate some of those things in what I say. But could I first of all say that the introduction of the pensions schemes bill was very welcome. I think it contains meaningful and impactful measures which will go a long way to address the challenges faced by our pensioners. And we know, for example, that people will hold 11 different jobs at least 11 different jobs during their working lives, and so will have paid into a multitude of different pension pots. You're more likely to have 25 different name badges from a company than you are after 25 years of service getting a gold watch. And most people will only realise when it gets to that stage in their life of coming up for retirement that these pension pots are theirs, they are available, and how best to utilise them. And quite often that's too late at that point in time. The people won't realise that sometimes you can take funds out of those, that they might have not been invested in the right way, or they might have been invested in a way that that person did not want to have invested. So I think information from pension providers, not just the annual update, but more regular updates, is really important. I think also employers should also have on payslips, whether we still get them physically or whether they are virtual payslips, as now is, should talk about pensions. Are you getting the right pensions advice? I think that could be something that's done every month for those that are paid monthly or week if it's weekly, but it should be there explicitly talking about pensions so that people are informed every step of the way, reminded every step of the way, because obviously people are very busy. I think the pensions dashboard is very welcome. I think it will simplify information and bring pension information to one place. It empowers them to do more than they've been previously been able to do with pieces of paper that are just given on a very intermittent basis. But I will also say, I think that one of the other areas of the pension schemes bill is the green pension investments. And I think that the UK is the first major economy to put climate risk and disclosure into statute for pension schemes. And I asked this last week of the Secretary of State for Department for Work and Pensions, because I really do think that although it's very much seen as a new area, and it is in terms of pensions, I think that generations coming up who are more inclined to support green issues will maybe want their pensions invested in some of these companies, and that's what we should empower them to do as well. And now, as my right honourable friend set out, people should receive a good retirement, and the government has shown through the bill that they understand the issues facing pensioners, and I genuinely believe they are being responsive to them. But when we talk about pensions, we're obviously talking about at the end of a process when people are going to receive a pension, or what time or time of life they retire. And we need to start talking about pensions much more at the start of people's working lives, when people start on that job, start in that career, and start saving, hopefully, for their retirement. So that, you know, as my honourable friend said, you know, it's maybe not the sexiest subject to speak about, but it is one of the most important, and it can be life-changing right at the start of somebody's career if they get it right or get it wrong. That's not to say, of course, to the points made before, that we should be looking at points in time where we do have that MOT of where our pensions are. And I think education in schools is absolutely key and critical. It should be there for all children in all schools, because I know when we had our financial education, it was kind of opening a bank account, and yes, we knew about credit cards and overdrafts and how to fill in a cheque. I remember that was a great cause for many of my fellow pupils at the time to get excited about. I must say, I'm so excited about it. I still use cheques right now. But that being said, you know, we should have had then, and we should be having now, more emphasis on talking about pensions and what that will mean in later life, because if we don't start explaining the long-term value of saving for a pension, we're never going to do it when it gets close to the point where they will receive a pension. So I think that's really important, and I know the Minister himself is actually committed to lifelong education in financial matters, and I think that, you know, there's no better advocate than him in the government to do that, and I would like to see more of that happen when he speaks to our right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Education. Now, I also want to talk about pension credit, because that was also brought up. And having paid into the system throughout their lives and doing the right thing, I know the government is doing all it can to ensure that those eligible for pension credit receive it. And pension credit, of course, ensures that weekly income pensioners receive what they receive weekly is brought up to the minimum amount, and is an absolute lifeline to many people. And I think, as being brought up, many people don't claim everything they can, and I think we should be encouraging people to claim what they're entitled to. And recent research commissioned by Independent Age show that we still have to work harder to do this. The level of pension credit uptake, if it was boosted to 100%, we could lift 450,000 pensioners out of poverty, and I think that's really important for whether they're buying groceries or heating their homes and living a life, not just an existence. It's incredibly important that in older age they don't feel as though they've got to feel shut away from society in any way. In 2018-19, £1.8 billion worth of pension credit was not received by those eligible for it. And the low uptake of pension credit actually does cost the taxpayer £4 billion a year in additional unavoidable NHS and social care spending. So in an area where you're looking to reform and change and make better, we could actually prevent the high level of spending by giving people right at the start what they're entitled to have. And renewing our focus on increasing uptake would actually save the taxpayer money, as I've said, and people would have a better standard of living in all parts of our country. Representatives of DWP have actually already confirmed that technology is there for greater automation of benefit provision, and that the data required was largely already held by the government. So hopefully we can unlock that to get this process going. We need to build upon this and work towards meaningful solutions for those in the pension credit scenarios. The key things I would like the Minister to take away, of course, are education. I think that is absolutely the start of where we can start to build a better pensions policy, a better pensions framework, better education for people, and more control for them to take the control they want over their lives, but in later life. I think we also need to look at the pension credit issue and making sure that we always have an eye on innovation and technology and those green industries, making sure that they are also promoted to people now, because there's no better time for them to be thinking about it, both in terms of their own future and the future of our planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Hosey. I'm grateful to be called in the debate this afternoon, and also thank the member for Delyn for calling for such a debate. The insecurity and inequality that people experience throughout their working lives is amplified in older life. I certainly see that in my own constituency, where insecure work, regrettably, marks the lives of so many people. In a city such as York, where Joseph Rowntree first introduced pensions in his factory in 1906, ahead of the Old Age Pension Act, which came into effect on the 1st of January 1909, Pensions Day, as it was known. And it was Seaborn Rowntree's work in this field that brought around that act. So my city itself has got a real investment in today's debate too. But we need to ask what the issue is, what the problem is we're trying to solve around pensions. Are pensions simply part of reward packages and used as a recruitment and retention tool by employers? Are employers really interested in the economic fortunes of its former employers once they have left employment? How do we address the serious issue of pensioner poverty? And are pensions fair and equitable, or dependent too much on past income, which we know is inequitable in itself? Today, we know that there's 1.9 million older people living in poverty, something that really amplifies that pensions have gone wrong, and therefore we need to look at how we address those issues. I particularly look through the prism of women and their experiences already building that inequality through their working life, with the pay gap, often more likely to be in part-time employment, more likely to be carers, and also the serious issue of underemployment. In fact, we know at the start of this pandemic, it's 70% of women who have lost their jobs. And therefore, we need to, 70% of people have lost their jobs who are women. And therefore, we need to understand why so many women are in pensioner poverty. We also know that young workers and black workers are more likely to be in insecure jobs. We know that disabled people themselves lose out altogether and fare worse. So inequality is hardwired into our pension system, exacerbating the unfairness of employment. And that's why I observed over the years as a trade union official why we need to bring redress into our pension system, and an issue that I would welcome the Minister looking at specifically. Now, if I can just touch on the issue of state pensions, we know in many countries like the Netherlands, Denmark, Australia, they have far better statutory provision in later life, and that can also be shown by the quality of life that people experience too, with the Netherlands taking 95% of average earnings, Denmark 66%, Australia 58%, and the UK just 29%. Therefore, insufficiency is also built into our pension system. We've heard much about the pension credit system, where only there is a 60% take-up, £2.8 billion not being claimed, and therefore I support the automation now that data can be shared and the technology is there to drive this inequality forward, enable people not just to access their pensions, but as we've heard, TV licences and other such benefits. So really important that that gap is closed, and with the mechanisms available to achieve that. Secondly, I just want to turn to employer schemes as well, and I'm happy to take a brief intervention.
I'm really grateful to her for giving way, and she's making a very well-informed speech, which is typical of the honourable member. Does she agree with me that much of the drive over recent decades to increase the state pension age has been really driven by the fact that life expectancy has been increasing? But there is evidence that life expectancy actually is starting to fall. There's a reverse in that. And if that becomes sustained, really, the UK government will need to look at pensions policy, maybe reverse some of the pension age increases we've seen over recent decades.
Thank you. The honourable member raised a really interesting point, because, of course, that was the basis on which the Cridland Review undertook its exercise in looking at how to address an ageing population. So you're right that the government needs to look at that specific issue. If we turn to employer schemes, and again, this is an issue that where we've seen a change in schemes over the years from more beneficial schemes like the defined benefit schemes, first from final salary into career average related earnings scheme, revalued earnings schemes. We know that that has rapidly moved also into defined contribution schemes where more risk is being placed on the worker, and therefore the lack of engagement in a complex world of pensions is ever more understandable. And of course, whilst auto enrolment in some of the pension schemes again shows insufficiency, which the Honourable Member drew out, but the employer contribution at just 3% is hardly investing in their workers' future. And I would urge that if we are looking at raising the sufficiency of such a scheme, that the stakeholder schemes, that we do see a greater employer contribution into those schemes as opposed to it being placed on the workers' shoulders. One of the other issues which I would like the Minister to look at today is the issue about the number of pension schemes. In many countries, they would have just a few hundred pension schemes altogether. We've got over 10,000 pension schemes, and therefore the range, and we know that many of those schemes are struggling. I look at the charity sector, where of the top 50 charities, there's a deficit now of 1.5 billion, whereas in other sectors, we know that people move from job to job to job, and therefore have no time in building up a pension pot with their company. If we move to a more sectoral approach and a sectoral model, it would give a lot more scope for individuals to be able to build a pension for their future, and certainly something where we could see that model of sectoral bargaining coming in shaping such a pension scheme. And I think it would be helpful to look into that. As I've also mentioned, the issues of equality need to be brought to the fore, not least because of the impact it has on women in poverty in later life. Economic events impact on pensions so much, and therefore we do need to ensure that we address those issues, but also recognise that in later life, those people from more areas of deprivation are likely to be in poor health, and therefore this issue of working longer is not always relevant, and we need to see more flexibility built in to pensions in later life, but also to ensure that individuals don't lose out because of working in different ways. I too echo the support that has been given for more financial education, and I too was at that event Aviva held around looking at work, wealth and well-being, and particularly in looking at having that MOT to check on you, your mental health as well as your physical health, and looking again midlife at the opportunities of finances ahead. But we need to ensure such opportunities are open to everyone. Finally, I do want to draw attention to building confidence again in pension systems. At a time when people have such little dispensable resource, people will be making choices of whether to invest in their longer term future or to buy essentials such as a meal for their family, and therefore we need to ensure that we address the poverty today as well as the poverty tomorrow. The WASPI women will be one example of a group that certainly made the right choices and yet were badly let down by the changes of decisions of government, and we need to make sure that confidence can be built in our system in order to ensure fair choices for people in the future.
Thank you, Mr Hosey. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I congratulate the Honourable Member for Dellen on securing this debate. I do think this autumn has demonstrated that there is considerable appetite in the House for discussions of pension policy. We've had the Social Security Uprating of Benefits Bill, we've had the landmark piece of pensions legislation in the Pension Schemes Bill, with amendments yet to be considered in the Lords. But not content with all that debate, thanks to the Honourable Member for Dellen, we now find ourselves looking to the horizon of pension policies yet to come. And of course that is entirely the right approach for two reasons. First, that pensions are, by their very nature, a long-term product. And so the policy decisions we are making right now will have an impact quite literally decades down the line. Let's say you're in your early 20s, you've just started your first permanent job and you're making your first pension contributions. You won't be drawing down that pension for another 45 or even 50 years, most likely. So the legislation and regulations that we make now, those, for instance, that are part of the Pension Schemes Bill, will have an effect stretching all the way into 2070 and beyond. And that really is long-term policy making. Secondly, this century poses new challenges of huge proportions. Those challenges, of course, include automation, an ageing population with increasing life expectancy. I'll note the honourable member's comments on that, and the climate emergency. And I wouldn't normally choose to quote Donald Rumsfeld, but when you consider the profound and unforeseen impact that a global pandemic has had on our society this year, we have to recognise it's not just those identifiable factors that we need to be concerned about, but it's also the unknown unknowns. And one matter I think is incredibly important when it comes to long-term pensions policy is the triple lock. It was a decade ago now that the Liberal Democrats helped introduce the triple lock on the state pension, and I want to pay tribute to the Pensions Minister then and former Liberal Democrat MP Steve Webb, who was instrumental in this. The triple lock has been a huge success and an incredibly popular measure, and indeed it's been adopted since its introduction by all major parties. Although I do note with concern that there has been some speculation that it's a measure which the government may look to scrap in future, and I do hope that rumours of its demise are greatly exaggerated, because I do think that the triple lock plays a crucial role. During the Social Security uprating of benefits bill in October, I spoke to the issue of intergenerational fairness, and that's an issue that has become very clear over the last few months, a time in which young people have had to put their lives on hold to stop the spread of a virus which doesn't necessarily always pose the same threat to them as it poses to those older in our society. And of course it's young people who will bear the brunt of the current and future economic cost, the immediate impact on the jobs market that we are seeing, but also because they will be saddled with the debt accrued into the future. Now, some say the triple lock is an issue which is making the gap between the generations grow even further, because on the face of it, you have a large sum of money being spent on older people. But as I made clear during the uprating bill, it's increasingly the case that many working age people are unable to save adequately for their retirement. It's certainly the case that the defined benefit schemes, which many people were historically enrolled in, are being used far less frequently. And all that means an increasing reliance on the state pension. And so it's vital that we make sure the state pension is strong. That's very important. It's important for this generation of retirees, but it's also important for the next one and the one after that. So I would continue to urge the Government, as I did during the uprating bill, to ensure that the triple lock is retained now and in the future. We need to be ensuring a good deal for the generation of people who are only starting out in work currently. The choices we make now will have an impact decades into the future. But of course, pensions policy isn't just about the long term, and as we've heard from other members, there are many steps that can and should be taken to ensure that pensions work better for people who are about to retire or indeed who have retired already. There are real financial impacts being felt by pensioners now. The Equitable Life scandal, the situation experienced by WASPy women, and the plumbers' pensions, which I raised during the Pension Schemes Bill debate last month. There's also the fact that many British pensioners overseas have their state pensions frozen, and the Government has not committed to uplifting those pensions, at the very least for the duration of the COVID pandemic. This has been a hugely difficult time for many of them in many different countries. We might just have taken a huge step in relation to pensions with legislation, but those campaigns continue, and it's imperative that the Government actively engages with those campaigns and campaigners, many of whom I know feel disheartened that the chance that they felt they had with the Pension Schemes Bill to resolve those issues was missed. They feel that they remain unheard. And another issue that I hope the Minister might specifically be able to address is that of married women who've been underpaid their state pension, having not been upgraded to their full pension when their husband reached state pension age. They could be potentially eligible for thousands of pounds in repayment from the DWP. I mentioned Steve Webb earlier, and this is an issue that he is working to highlight and to resolve. We know that at least 1,900 women have been paid out to, but the Government has not yet said how much money has been paid out in total. We urgently need to know how many women the Government estimate that have potentially been underpaid. It's so important these women are informed as soon as possible they've been underpaid. Many members have talked about the pension credits. We need to inform people of what they're due, and I hope the Minister will address this in his response, because so far there's not been sufficient clarity from Government on the scale of this problem and indeed what is being done to address it. Finally, I'll come back again to the Pension Scheme Bill, because it hasn't been passed yet. Amendments are still being considered by the Lords, and while the scope of possible changes to the bill is now limited, I do hope the Government will be willing to engage and potentially restore some of the additions made in the bill. As the Minister knows, I'm particularly keen to see further clarity on the issue of open defined benefit schemes, and I hope the Government will continue to engage with my colleague Baroness Bowles on that issue. And in fact, I believe you're doing so today.
On that particular point, she'll be pleased to know that on section 123 in OpenDB, provided this debate ends on time, I go straight into a meeting with a cross-party group of Lords on that specific point. And I very much will be making the point to them that the pension regulator will be very happy to meet with the Lords, to engage with them and to ensure that there is an opportunity for them to have a full comprehension of what the proposed regulations are going to be, and also that we remain very supportive on an ongoing basis of DB.
The Minister, I only became aware of the meeting today while I was sitting here a short time ago, and thank him for his response. There is still an opportunity to make that bill even better than it is, and I do urge the Government to take that chance. That bill lays the foundations for the future of pensions policy. Thank you.
And it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. And thanks also to the Honourable Member for Delyn for securing today's debate. Of course, my honourable friend, the member for Easton Bartonshire, would have been here today, but for her recent health issues, and I know other members will be pleased to hear that she's showing good signs of recovery, and I know that everyone will join me in sending our best wishes to her. Members should be in no doubt that the SNP believe that pensions policy should be in Scotland's hands. This would let our Scottish Parliament set a policy that reflects Scotland's circumstances. That opportunity to do things which work better for people in Scotland will come with independence, which more and more people recognise as the best future for Scotland. But for now, while the SNP broadly supported the current bill, we do believe improvements can be made, including on managing the rollout and risks of pensions dashboards, protecting existing defined benefit schemes, tackling the injustice of Section 75 debt and improving automatic enrolment. But pensions policy must address more fundamental issues. As the Honourable Member for Delyn said, pensions policy should be a simple matter, allowing people to save up during their working life to finance their retirement. But instead, it's notoriously complex. Indeed, it's of such complexity that many people switch off, leaving their biggest asset, their future security, in the hands of others. Adding new options such as collective money purchase schemes increases that complexity. And one of the questions facing the UK is, why has the pensions bar been set so low compared to other countries? A 2017 report by the OECD found UK pensioners get the worst deal of any OECD country, retiring on just 29% of national average earnings, compared to an OECD average of 63% and an average for EU member states of 71%. So as the UK's population ages, this leaves much of the population with little choice and limited purchasing power. Even the triple lock, which the Honourable Member for North East Fife spoke comprehensively about, has had a limited impact, with the value of the basic state pension increasing by less than 1.5% of national average earnings since 2011. So recognising that current pensions are too low to support a lengthy retirement should be the beginning of a serious programme for change. The SNP has long supported the establishment of an independent Savings and Pensions Commission to ensure that pensions and savings policies are fit for purpose. Such a commission could prevent changes being announced with no assessment of the impact and without communication of the changes being made properly, as happened when 1950s-born women, the WASPI women, had their state pension age changed with little or no notice or information, as the Honourable Member for Luton noted. Also, the increase in state pension age beyond 66 doesn't take account of the demographic challenges we face in Scotland. But it seems that we in Scotland, just like the WASPI women, are getting a message, which is that this government and this Parliament aren't listening. Ahead of the spending review, the Chancellor was warned that the proposal to reform measures of inflation would result in more than 10 million pensioners losing out if he moves to a lower inflation measure. Where was the public debate around a so-called technical adjustment that could take an estimated £60 billion out of UK pension funds? For many people on low pensions, pension credit could be the difference between living in poverty and simply keeping their head above water. But pension credit take-up has stagnated around 60% for the last 10 years. Over 1 million pensioners are missing this lifeline, which also opens access to other vital benefits. And despite only recently taking responsibility for some benefits, the Scottish Government has already published a benefit take-up strategy and is working to increase awareness and access to Scottish benefits. And I know the Honourable Member for Glasgow North East has been doing a great deal of work on this. So the UK Government really needs a similar take-up campaign and a strategy for reserve benefits, including pension credit. I wonder if the Minister will commit to putting such a campaign in place to make sure that people are aware of benefits and can access those to which they're entitled. In the midst of great uncertainty, protecting people's savings and eliminating pension or poverty is more important than it's ever been. And young people whose lives and prospects could be irreparably damaged by both COVID and Brexit face losing out on vital lifetime savings. And we've heard that there are significant gender, ethnic and regional disparities in pensions incomes that a Savings and Pensions Commission could address. A 2018 study by the Chartered Institute of Insurance noted that by the time a woman is aged 65 to 69, her average pension wealth is £35,700, which is roughly a fifth of that of a man her age. That's a shocking figure and surely reflects the number of women who've not saved for a pension because of low earnings. The SNP support automatic enrolment, but far too many have been left behind. The UK Government needs to extend its coverage. That could be done by reducing the earnings threshold to the National Insurance primary threshold, bringing almost 500,000 people, mostly women, into pension saving, lowering the age threshold from 22 to 18 and saving from the first pound earned would also reinforce the importance of starting a savings habit early. But that can only be afforded if we extend the real living wage. One of the reasons for pensions complexity is the need for reassurance that funds held over a long period of time won't disappear or promised returns fail to materialise. And that's why pensions need strong consumer protections. But too often governments have failed to deliver this. George Osborne failed to do that when he introduced so-called pensions freedoms in 2015. The SNP voiced its opposition at the time, highlighting the risk to people transferring funds out of their pension to their detriment. But unfortunately, the evidence is that this has turned into yet another government-initiated scammer's paradise, which will further inflict damage on the reputation of the UK financial services sector. Mr Hosey, I want to address the biggest long-term challenge we face in future pensions policy. What will happen to pensions if we allow the assets on which they depend to be significantly devalued or rendered unusable by climate change? The SNP support industry calls for firms to include climate change-related disclosures in their annual reports, and the Honourable Member for Southport sounded like he might agree with that. And we're committed to putting this onto a statutory basis. The SNP also supports moves to introduce an easy-to-understand system of climate-friendly external audit so small investors can better understand the climate-related risks of investments, including the risks facing company pension schemes. It was hugely disappointing that the UK Government prevented occupational pension schemes from being required to develop a strategy for aligning investments with Paris Agreement goals and net zero emissions targets. With COP26 coming to Glasgow next year, perhaps the Minister could share with members what advice the DWP has received from the Climate Change Committee on the role of pensions in tackling climate challenge, and if no advice has been received, will the Department ask for it? Mr Hosey, if I may, I'd also like to ask the Minister to address the issue which we've heard about already of frozen pensions. 500,000 UK pensioners living overseas don't receive an increase to their UK state pension with the value frozen when they leave the UK or when their pension's first drawn. Basically, this means that their pension decreases in real value year on year, and because it only applies in some countries, we've now got significant inequality built up, and, for instance, a disproportionate impact on groups such as the Windrush generation. And, Mr Hosey, I'd like to finish by highlighting an issue of inequality, and that's the topic that the Honourable Member of York Central was particularly concerned about. This is a situation which was brought to my attention by a constituent who was allocated a share of her husband's police pension as part of a divorce settlement. Having become unable to work due to ill health, she was told that although her ex-husband had retired early and drawn his share of the pension, she is unable to do so until she turns 60. She was shocked to find that such discriminatory regulations are expressly permitted under Section 61 of the Equality Act 2010. I wonder, would the Minister agree with me that this seems wholly inappropriate in 2020? And I'd ask if he can contribute today to let me know what he thinks can be done to address that issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Hosey. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and may I welcome this debate in which I speak on behalf of my honourable friend, the member for Birmingham Erdington, and also congratulate the honourable member for Delyn on securing this debate and for his broad-ranging open remarks on the need to support pensioners, the uptake of pension credit, the scourge of pensioner poverty, sufficiency of pension savings and many other issues. May I also thank other honourable members for their contributions today. The honourable member for my honourable friend for member for Luton North spoke very powerfully about the plight of WASPI women, which I will refer to in my remarks. The honourable members also for Southport, York Central and North East 5. Honourable members are right that it is all too often that pensions are seen as a distant and complex topic, but making it easy and accessible to understand is vital, and particularly for engaging younger people in savings choices early in their life. Indeed, a pound saved at 18 is worth much more in retirement than a pound saved at age 30 or 40 or later. And I also welcome the many contributions that have been made on the importance of lifelong financial learning and literacy. Ensuring that everyone, no matter their background, occupation or gender, has dignity and security in their old age should be the fundamental objective of pension policy. But this complex and long-term nature of pensions policy decisions and the long-term careful planning of public finances does mean that these ambitions are best realised through political cooperation and consensus. That's why in government, Labour introduced the Pensions Commission in 2002 to provide a comprehensive analysis of the UK pension system, assess how it was developing over time and make recommendations on the long-term funding of pensions. Indeed, the Commission charted a new direction in UK pensions policy and gained widespread consensus on reforms that may previously have been regarded as unthinkable. For instance, I'm proud that it was the last Labour government that created auto-enrolment, which has transformed the lives of millions, with 10 million more now saving into a workplace pension. And I also give credit to the current government for their work to drive forward auto-enrolment when they took office in 2010. However, we are, I think, all concerned that an estimated 12 million people may still be under-saving for retirement. We welcome the review of the policy that was commissioned in 2017 and that it recommended that the age threshold for auto-enrolment be lowered from 22 to 18 and that the lower limit of the qualifying earnings band should be removed so that contributions are payable from the first pound earned by an employee. The Minister told us in committee that the review will be implemented in mid-2020s. But could we have confirmation that the intended legislation will enact those two proposals, and if he can give further detail on a time frame? I will give way.
So I welcome the sort of cross-party tone, I hope it continues, that she is making. And of course, with automatic enrolment, it is a classic example of a policy instituted by Labour, brought forward under the coalition, and then finally taken forward under the Conservative government. But it is most definitely the case that we would seek to be doing that in this Parliament, because we've indicated it will be brought forward by the mid-2020s. But it also applies that many of the other policies that she's talking about, whether it is state pension age increased by the Labour government under the Pensions Act of 2007, are cross-party decisions that I hope she continues to support.
I thank the Minister for his intervention, as indeed he knows the importance that we also hold to having cross-party consensus on these important strategic directions in our pensions policy, and that we have worked closely with him on many measures in the pension schemes bill. Mr Hosey, there could also not be a more important time for us to work together to protect people's financial security in retirement, because even though the government refused to publish their dossier on the economic impact of coronavirus, we know that the economic fallout is vast. Indeed, according to the OECD, the pandemic has compounded the challenges facing retirement savings, including pressures such as ageing populations, low growth and low returns that will continue long into the future.
Further, the fall of major employers puts the pensions of entire workforces at risk. If you take, for example, the uncertain status of the 10,000 members of the Arcadia Defined Benefit Pension Scheme, which faces an eye-watering deficit of around 350 million. We believe the government must act to ensure that these workers get the pensions they are owed. In the case of Arcadia, it is Labour's firm view that Sir Philip Green and Lady Green owe a moral responsibility to the employees to fill the pensions shortfall. They must not allow their workers to go into Christmas not only having to deal with the consequences of losing their jobs, but also fearing for their pensions. Now, this pandemic also brings increased risk of pension scammers. Preying on people who are worried about the impact of the current economic uncertainty on their savings. It's why Labour fully supported the Right Honourable Member for East Ham's amendments to the Pension Schemes Bill to better protect people from risky transfers and improve the provision of advice to stop people falling prey to scammers. We regret that the government did not support the Right Honourable Member's amendments, but we welcomed assurances from the Minister that regulations will be brought to ensure that trustees should not have to proceed with a transfer where there were good grounds for believing that a proposed transfer involved moving pension savings into a scam. On auto-enrolling people into pensions guidance appointments, Pensions Wise is an excellent service with high satisfaction ratings, but only 1 in 33 of those eligible to use it do so. Surely it's more important than ever that people are making use of impartial guidance appointments, and we would welcome concrete proposals by the government to improve take-up of these appointments. Now, on pensions charges, at a time when millions are struggling, it is vital that pensions costs and charges are reasonable, transparent, and that people receive value for money. Research by Pension B found that 70% of non-advised drawdown customers pay more than 0.75% a year in charges, costing them 40 to 50 million extra a year, and more than 175 million since the pensions freedoms were introduced. The long-term impact of high costs and charges for income drawdown could be significant. It's argued that putting costs and charges on the simpler annual statement would confuse people. But instead of being provided with specific information about how much they're paying, they'll be signposted to what could be pages and pages of information about charges. We note that the Minister has said that cost and charges information will only be displayed on the pensions dashboard in the longer term. But we would welcome any discussions about guarantee as well for value for money. On climate change, I return to this area, very important for future pensions policy. The investments decisions taken by pensions involve trillions of pounds, the kind of money that can catalyse significant change when used responsibly, from investing in infrastructure to green technologies. Labour's amendment to the Pension Schemes Bill sought to ask pension funds to demonstrate how they're helping us get to net zero emissions. It's hard to see how the government can achieve its own climate goals while excluding trillions of pounds of British capital from those efforts. By voting against our amendment, we do believe a chance was missed to mobilise pensions funds to protect the planet and support the drive to net zero. This is despite the fact that there's clear public support for such a move. The government must use all the tools at their disposal to channel pensions funds into investments that benefit people and planet. Finally, I highlight particular challenges faced by specific groups where there are injustices needing further action. On the former ASW steelworkers, the Minister is aware that their plight is a desperate one. Many work for decades, paying 100% of their pensions, only to find years later they only receive half of what they're entitled to. They've been fighting for pensions, their full pensions, for 20 years. So will the Minister confirm when he plans to meet the ASW steelworkers, as he has committed to, and will he work to find a cross-party solution? On WASPI women, I once again raise the plight, as has been spoken for so powerfully by my honourable friend, the member for Luton North. Labour also found recently that there are 15,000 1950s women who are claiming universal credit, and the pandemic will have made this worse. It's unacceptable that 50s women have been forgotten by the Conservative government, both within the crisis and out. Finally, there's the issue of pensions underpayments for married women. It does feel, Mr Hosey, that almost every week a new story comes to light of the DWP's mistakes in paying women their full pensions entitlements. What is particularly concerning is that many of those affected contacted the department and were wrongly told that their pensions were correct. This is simply not good enough. Every single one of these issues I have addressed relies on an effective departmental delivery of pensions entitlements. Yet this issue raises profound questions about the ability of the DWP to do just that. Labour called for an inquiry into the mismanagement of pensions payments earlier this year. It's time for the government to take urgent action on this growing scandal and to make sure every woman affected is paid the pension to which she is entitled and to address the root causes of the mistakes made. In conclusion, Mr Hosey, putting future pensions policy on a long-term footing necessitates careful planning and a consensus-driven approach. Labour stand ready to support the government where they bring forward proposals to protect people's pensions and savings. However, we urge the government to take action to address the clear cases of pensions injustice I've highlighted, as well as those likely to emerge through the pandemic. We also call on the government to take a greater role in ensuring that funds are invested in a socially and environmentally beneficial way. Thank you, Mr Hosey.
Thank you, Mr Hosey. Pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I congratulate my honourable friend for securing this very, very important debate, and I look forward greatly to, in exactly 9 minutes, summing up about 35 different particular points and addressing all of them in copious detail, and I undertake to try and write to honourable friends if I'm not able to do so. Can I start, though, with one particular point, which is the honourable lady from East Dunbartonshire was mentioned, and I also had a brain tumour and collapsed in the House of Commons in 2011, and I wish her tremendous good fortune in her recovery. We miss her. I look forward to her coming back to this place and causing me difficulties and posing important and genuine questions, which I'm sure she will continue to do so, and we all send our best wishes in her recovery. My honourable friend raises a very, very important debate. The fundamental is that pensions play a vital, vital part in all of our constituents' lives, and it is right that we debate these matters and that we champion their causes on an ongoing basis. And whilst the government's immediate priority is obviously the conquering of COVID and to build back better, and we have a plan for jobs taking things forward, but we also are key in our desire to ensure that we protect people's pensions and support people to save for their retirement. And so it is timely and right that my honourable friend raises the points that he does, and I will attempt to address those points in a bit of detail. But I want to first of all touch on the issue of the fundamentals of state pension and the fact that we now spend £126 billion on pensioners. That is the highest that has ever been in this country, of which state pension is £102 billion. The state pension has gone up by £1,900 in real terms since 2010, thanks to the triple lock and various other measures. And we are in a position, Mr Hosey, that material deprivation for pensioners has fallen from 10% to 6% in 2018-19. And average pensioner incomes have grown significantly in real terms over the last 2 decades. Average weekly income in 94-95 was £165 a week after housing costs. In 2018-19 prices compared to £320 a week in 2018-19. Now, clearly, there is more to do, and my honourable friend rightfully raises the issue of pension credit. This is a policy introduced by the previous Chancellor Gordon Brown under the Labour government, and successive governments have had a variety of strategies, advertising campaigns, initiatives to try and boost take-up. But what is patently clear, and the stats are all available, that they exist between roughly 60 and 76% in terms of take-up of pension credit, that even with significant advertising campaigns, for example, the Labour government spent over £14 million after the launch of pension credit, and in fact the take-up went down, if not was static that particular year. The reality is that we need to work with trusted partners, and that is what we are trying to do. We are trying to institute a variety of campaigns. We had a nationwide campaign in the spring of last year to boost pension credit. We also have the online pension credit claim facility, and the online service ensures the ease of access for anyone wishing to make a claim. There is a whole host of other matters that we are doing to take forward pension credit take-up, but I would particularly inform the House that we have, following a cross-party meeting with the House of Lords, reached out to the BBC and to Tim Davey, the new Chief Executive of the BBC, to see if there is anything that the BBC can do to improve and expand upon that particular process. And I will put on the record in the library the letter that myself and Baroness Stebbins-Scott have written to Mr Davey to see to what extent we could significantly enhance the take-up of pension credit. My honourable friend raised the idea of an automatic entitlement to pension credit. I fear that that is something that is simply not possible on the data that is available to the state at this stage. There may be a time in the future when that data and capability exists, but it is simply not possible to do that particular thing at the present stage. I turn to the point he raises on automatic enrolment, and many things were said in respect of both the cross-party nature of this particular problem, but also the desire to have a better outcome. And automatic enrolment has ensured that the participation for private sector eligible women has increased from 40% to 86%. Now that is equal to men, I should say. And for the private sector eligible 22 to 29-year-olds has gone up from 24% to 85%. Now, over the period of 2019-2020, working people will save an extra £18 billion into workplace pensions as a result of these reforms. And every single Member of Parliament in this room and representing in the House of Commons will find there are literally thousands and thousands of constituents and many thousands of employers who are doing the right thing and providing the 8% automatic enrolment. Is there more to do? Of course there is more to do. Will we be instituting the lower earnings threshold? Will we institute from age 18? Yes, the government has made it crucially clear that following the 2017 review, that is exactly what we will do. And without a shadow of a doubt, that will be brought forward at some stage in this Parliament, I hope. But obviously, those matters are somewhat beyond my control. Speaking of beyond my control, the honourable gentleman raised the very important issue in terms of lifetime's allowance on tax relief pension savings, and waxed lyrical at a point that I'm delighted to say I'm going to raise with the Chancellor personally, and I look forward to the Chancellor addressing that particular point at the budget statement in March, if he is so inclined. But clearly that is a matter for the Chancellor. I hope that his plea is taken on board, but clearly that's a matter entirely for the Chancellor. In respect of automatic enrolment, he raised one very, very interesting point as well, which I do want to touch on, which is the idea of a 1% saving added on to the automatic enrolment in the future. And there is no question that we want to try and look at the possibility of having a rainy day fund, whether it is a 1% add-on to whatever the future of automatic enrolment is. And it is something that I personally am looking at going forward. Clearly, there are many decisions to be made on the future of automatic enrolment going forward, but without any shadow of a doubt, trying to improve the financial capability, the financial resilience and the financial inclusion of this country is a massively important point. On that issue, we talked about the midlife MOT. It is something that we back totally. I met with the new Chief Executive of the FCA to discuss how it is we can improve the capability of the individuals from the ages of 47, when apparently for men you are in your midlife, and for women it is later. And the reality is that we want tremendously to improve midlife MOT as an option and an understanding so that we really have an addressing at an early stage wealth, work and well-being. I've got about a minute to finish. Simpler statements will go forward. On the state pension age increases, as I indicated to the Honourable Lady, that is a Labour Party policy that the Coalition and the Conservative government have continued to implement, and there is no plans to change that. In respect of costs and charges, clearly we have a review of that on an ongoing basis, and clearly there is great work that is going forward that we can take otherwise. Can I make the point, Mr Hosey, that I am deeply grateful to the House to have the opportunity to address the issue of pension policy going forward. There is no question that these are serious issues. This government is absolutely zeroed in on trying to make pension policy really work. I totally dispute that we're not doing anything on climate change, because with COP coming, we lead the way. We're the first country to legislate for net zero, and we are the first country to legislate for the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. We lead the way on all matters from green gilts and otherwise, and I believe very strongly that climate change and pensions will go hand in hand going forward under this Prime Minister's leadership. And I thank the honourable gentleman for his debate today.
Roberts, to wind up briefly.
Thank you, Mr Hosey, and thank you to the Minister for his summing up. I'm very interested to hear about using the BBC to enhance pension credit take-up. I suggested that very thing to Our right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, just last week at DWP Questions. Very good to know that there's movement on that. Very pleased to hear about auto-enrolment changes on age limits and losing the lower earnings limit, as well as looking at adding a savings element. All very, very good. And I'd just like to thank colleagues generally. There seemed to be wide-ranging agreement on things like promoting the idea of automation where we can, and financial education, which may include not only knowledge and facts, but also the skills and critical thinking and analysis that will serve our young people so well. Cross-party support and agreement on many issues, not, sadly, for the Honourable Lady for East Renfrewshire's comments on Scottish independence, sadly, but that's for another day. But I did appreciate the Honourable Lady for North East Fife channeling her inner Donald Rumsfeld and trying to tackle the unknown unknowns. I think we'll allow our mortal minister to tackle the known unknowns before we give him any kind of clairvoyancy powers, but definitely a wise thing to be doing. I appreciate everyone's contributions and that of the Minister. I beg to move, Mr Hosey, that this House has considered future pensions policy.
The question is that this House has considered the future of pensions policy. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no.